This is OverDrive with Hayes, Noodles, and the O-Dog on TSN 1050.
Hour 2 OverDrive continues, brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. Bryan Hayes, Jonas, Siegel of The Athletic. We've got a big hour. Curtis Strange later this hour. Our buddy Dallas Braden will join us here in a moment. Jay's off tonight, back in action tomorrow night. And I'm sure you saw some of the big introduction of Leo Messi down in Miami. Jonas, is that in your wheelhouse? Are you a big Messi guy? You're really excited that he's in MLS or what?
I've read a little bit about it. I think it's interesting. Do you?
Oh, it's incredibly interesting. That's indisputable. But is it going to drag you to MLS? If you don't already commit time to watching MLS, are you all in now because Messi's here?
No, but I did want to tell you, ever since, did you ever watch that Netflix show about the golfers?
Yeah, Full Swing.
Yeah, so I started watching that, and ever since I started watching that, I sort of pay attention to, like,
You're a golf guy now.
I check the scores. I'm kind of interested a little bit.
Look at you.
So I'm just wondering if that's the way more and more leagues go to get people like me interested. Like, I'm not interested. I watch the F1 thing. I still don't really care, but I care more than I did before.
It can't hurt, right? Clearly, any type of advertising and any type of storytelling that allows you to feel some sort of a connection is going to be a good thing. For sure. And I'm assuming Messi and Apple TV, like, there's going to be a lot of content that's coming out of this.
Yes.
And this will be a different beast for him because everywhere he goes, it's not about selling, right? Like, when this guy was in Barcelona, there's no selling. It's Barcelona. Like, if obviously they're going to sell out Nou Camp. Like, obviously it's going to be a packed house. Obviously it's going to be the biggest thing going. He added to it, but it wasn't like Barca was a nothing team with no history before Messi showed up, or PSG or wherever else he was going to play. This is different. This is, soccer has been growing year over year, decade over decade for a long time. MLS is in a much better position today than they were when Beckham came over here about 15 years ago in terms of, franchise value, the TV deal, the amount of ticket holders, all that kind of stuff. But it's still way behind the NFL, NBA, baseball. It's kind of there with hockey in some capacities. I think the NHL in most markets is still bigger. But listen, it was a really cool introduction. I am very intrigued to see, how much he actually plays. How many like, is it imperative he goes to every spot? Right? Like, he's not going to happen this year. They've already been through Toronto. But like, if he's here for a couple of years, does he have to play everywhere? I think he kind of does if he's taken on the ambassador role, if he's taken on this role of part owner, he's in on the Apple TV deal. It can't just be playing home games in Miami and playing in New York and LA, right? Like, you got to commit, you got to play, and I want to see if he completely dominates. There's no reason he shouldn't. The guy was just the best player at the World Cup less than a year ago.
Do you think it will get more people to watch on Apple TV? Like, will you watch?
I don't know if I will.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, right?
Yeah, that's a big, big part of it. I will say I will be intrigued when he first plays. I'll be watching. If he's up here in Toronto, I'd love to go. That's what I'll tell you. I'd love to go. I'd love to be able to say I saw him play live. So I don't think it's as much about the TV as it is about the tickets and him in town and being able to see him play. Like it's actually kind of counterintuitive from my standpoint, where it's not about building the Apple TV. It's not about building, the national flair of MLS and creating a national narrative that revolves around Messi and him being synonymous with MLS. It's really about a legend whenever he's in your town. If he's in your town, I want to be able to say I saw him play. But so I want to go watch him play at BMO Field as opposed to sit on my couch and watch Miami play, whoever it is, the Galaxy in LA.
But then how does it grow the league?
Well, I don't have that answer for you yet.
Because isn't part of this like you want to get international fans watching MLS and signing up for Apple TV?
And I would assume that'll be the case.
We should be getting paid for these plugs, by the way.
Yeah, you're right. It's a lot of Apple TV and Netflix plugs in 4 minutes. I'd love to see the numbers in Argentina. Like I would assume they'll be big, and you're talking a timeline now that fits with Argentina, right? Like it's no longer you're not playing 5 hours ahead, 6 hours ahead. Now primetime games in Miami will be primetime in Argentina, which I think will probably go a long way, and I'm sure they're banking on that as you get in South American viewers. But you're right. Are there people in Europe that are going to be watching him play? I don't know, because they got what they got everything they need over in Europe.
Like, would you watch McDavid play like a minor league hockey game? Because
no, I wouldn't.
Isn't that kind of what this is?
Exactly. If he went to play in Sweden, I'd never see him play again. That's the truth. If he went to the Swedish Elite League, I'd say, good for you. That's great. I'm never going to see you play hockey again until you come back home. Right? That's the truth. And I would assume that'll be the case for most people in Barcelona, in Paris, wherever it is. They'll track it. They'll be intrigued by it. I'd read about McDavid. I'd see what he's up to. But I'm not PVRing one of his games. Hey, he's playing for London tonight. I have to see what McDavid's going to do. No chance. No. More on that in the Publix. I saw him at Publix. I don't know if you caught this debate that O and I had, Jonas, a few weeks ago. We'll revisit it, and I think basically I had a mic drop moment based on video that came out of Messi, out of Publix in Miami. I'll tell you about that later in the hour. Jay's off tonight. Back in action with your Padres in town tomorrow. Here is former MLB pitcher, Baseball is Dead podcast host, one of our favorites, back on the Maple Toyota hotline. Here's Dallas Braden. What's up, Dallas?
How we doing, boys?
We're doing well, man. We're doing well. We're feeling good about the Jays. They've won 8 of 9, and they come out hot coming out of the break. They swept the Diamondbacks over the weekend. They're off tonight, but, we were discussing this. How many teams in the American League are really scaring anybody right now? And I'm curious if you can put yourself in the shoes of a Blue Jay fan right now. Like, are you looking at the Jays saying, like, why not us? Why can't they be the hot team that gets cooking down the stretch and possibly be the, not the favorite necessarily, but one of the favorites going into the playoffs?
It can absolutely happen. It can absolutely happen, and for a multitude of reasons. One, I think first and foremost, the competition that the Jays face day in and day out really in that division. That division is an absolute beast right now, a beast, right? All 5 teams over the 50-win mark. There's not another division in the American League, I believe, that has more than 2 teams with 50 wins. I don't think the Central has a team with 50 wins. So just as far as what they've been able to do, not only in the division as far as surviving, but just being able to gauge where their competition is. You have the Tampa Bay Rays, who got off to a 2-week head start in baseball, better than everybody, right? And that gap has closed significantly between them and the Orioles, who are just a game back. And you've got the Jays right there, just 6 back of what the Tampa Bay Rays did. Again, a 2-week head start, beating the brakes off of everyone to get the season started. And right now you've got the core guys in this Jays lineup that are performing. They're getting the job done. Kikuchi has answered the bell in the absence of Manoah. That's a nice conversation, although it'd be a tricky one, and I know that that's kind of what they're kicking down the road right now is what role does Kikuchi fill? What does that kind of look like moving forward? So there's no reason to think that right now with what the Blue Jays are doing and where they could be, that they can't be right in the thick of this. There's no reason to say that they can't end up catching Baltimore. That's just it's a jam-packed division right now. But the Blue Jays, I think, sit comfortably right in the middle of that, as well as having already I think the second spot in the wild card.
Well, which of those teams scares you the most? Because I'm actually curious about the O's. Do you believe in them at all, or do you just think you can't be that young and actually be dangerous?
Oh, they can be that young and they can be that dangerous. And they've got a kid starting tonight, Grayson Rodriguez, who I think if he can start to get anywhere close to the expectation, then you really have something, right? I mean, because that's what the Blue Jays have needed, or not Blue Jays, excuse me. That's what the Orioles have needed is just a little help on the mound. That bullpen's great. They got a guy that they're trying to call King Felix out there. I can't let that happen, but he is phenomenal. He is absolutely phenomenal. So when you think about what do you need in the postseason, you need to be able to count for really important outs at the back end of the ball game. They've got that. So I think the Orioles are a very real threat. There's no reason to think they're not, because they're getting the performances from the guys that were supposed to come up and that were supposed to be impact players, the Gunners, the Adleys. That's happening, right? They've got, 5, 6, 7 first-rounders, I believe, all told, in that dugout right now. So, yeah, there's no reason that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing at this point, and I think that's what's exciting about baseball in Baltimore right now is there was this expectation once these guys got here. They're performing, and so it's almost like expectation met. Now let's get hungry.
With Dallas Braden, and yeah, you mentioned the Central's got no one that's going to scare you. Texas and Houston out west, you're currently looking at, and you're obviously aware of what they're capable of doing. But we were talking about this in terms of the Ohtani discussion, and I'll begin by asking you if you believe Ohtani will actually get flipped. Do you think the Angels will really follow through and go beyond listening to offers and actually trade him before the deadline?
Here's where I think it gets tricky is because if you're Mike Trout, what does a trade of Ohtani represent realistically? Because he's talked about wanting to win, right? And he's been okay with that either happening or not happening in the past in Anaheim. Well, now after the WBC and the taste of what that stage is like, and watching Ohtani essentially come and go for the very reasons that ultimately you play this game, which is to win that championship, well, then I wonder what that does. And if the Angels know anything and they have an idea of what Mike Trout's reaction to that would be, I've got to believe that that plays a major role in this decision to move Ohtani or not, because should you move Ohtani, now you have to wonder if Mike Trout isn't really catching the door before it even shuts on the way back into the GM's office going, and now let's talk about me finding a home. Now let's talk about me being something or a piece that can help you get what you need in this ultimately what it looks to be would be a rebuild. Because there's no way I can think that you look at where you're at right now roster-wise and what you've gotten production-wise and think that that's just going to fly. Think that you're going to move the game's greatest talent you've ever seen, and then from there, you're just going to be okay? That's going to be a tough one to swallow.
Well,
so that's, I guess, a long-winded way to say I would have to believe if they trade Ohtani, there's got to be a full commit to a full rebuild.
I would probably think that that's probably in their best interest, but who knows with the way that they operate. And you bring up a great point about Trout and his stance and him watching and wondering how this is all going to play out. But hypothetically, if it gets to that point in the next 10 days or so where they say, you know what, we got to move from this guy. He's not going to re-sign and we need to completely turn things over. I think the Blue Jays should be all in because of what we said earlier. I don't see a team in the American League that terrifies me right now. Gosman's banged up. I think he'll be okay. He's been great this year. Bassett's been great this year. Barrios has really had a bounce back year, actually. He's been outstanding. But the story on Manoah is completely undetermined. He had that one great start in Detroit, or very good start, the comebacker, but he's not out of the woods yet. Kikuchi's holding on for dear life. They got Ryu, who could be back anytime, the next month or so and possibly be an option. But you bring in Ohtani to sit atop your rotation, a left-handed power bat, which is what they need. They've been lacking power all year. I'd be all in, absolutely all in. Could you see the Blue Jays doing that? Do you believe they should if hypothetically Ohtani was available?
Well, you got to think about who you're going to be getting rid of and saying goodbye to. Probably somebody in that lineup based on what's available prospect-wise, because you are talking top prospects and multiple of them at the very minimum. That's just to get in the building. Right? That is just to get in the building. We'll check your ID a little later down the hallway and see what you got there. But just to even get in the building, this is what we're asking. This is the entry fee. And then from there, you got to think about what the Blue Jays are willing to do, because and this is what you have to consider is whether or not they're going to commit, can commit, or willing to commit to what it takes to house a Ohtani, to be able to take care of an Ohtani rotation-wise. Moving guys around in the rotation. Are we okay with making it a six-man of sorts? Are we okay with potentially not having Ohtani later down the road. That's the biggest point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is who is willing to cough up the asking price for essentially 2 months worth of a first date? Because that's what it is.
Yep.
You're trying to court him. You're trying to show him why he would never, ever – you're trying to show him why he would want to raise his family in Canada. That's what you're trying to show him, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have that club in your bag? And I mean, that's going to take multiple clubs, right? You can't show up to the par 3 executive course without a wedge.
Right.
You're going to need a putter. You're going to need these things.
Well, so Dallas, what do you think a trade package looks like for someone like Ohtani? Just because we were talking before, like he's 2 players. And I was going to ask Hayes this, but I'll ask you. If the Angels look at your prospect pool and they're like, yeah, this is okay, we want Manoah. What do you say? What do you do?
See ya. Absolutely. Here you go.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yep.
Well, and he is a rental, right?
Yeah, and it's going to. I mean, that's again that's and that is, I don't want to say almost entry level, but that is like okay, and
yeah.
I'm now we're listening.
What else?
Okay, we've got a couple top prospects. We've got Manoah. Let's take a look at some guys in that lineup as well. And we're talking about controllability. Like we're going to need a lot of things going our way or coming our way as the Angels, and that's why And the other thing is the move of Ohtani. Think about what Ohtani brings to an organization, total value-wise, right? And then not having Shohei Ohtani. That's like walking into a house that you're going to buy, and you see this beautiful pool in the backyard, great outdoor kitchen, and then you come back to buy it, and you're like, well, where'd the pool go? Where's the outdoor kitchen? What happened? Because Ohtani's no longer there. And that's why the question when the front office or the ownership, was kicking around the idea of selling the franchise, you have to consider who's now willing to purchase a franchise like that has an aging Mike Trout that does not have Ohtani guaranteed coming back to it. And did that have an impact on pulling the organization or the offer of the organization back? Because is Artie Moreno willing to just go all in now and try to lock Ohtani up? And that's where the size of the return on the package for Ohtani really can, it's endless. It's endless to think about.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, though, because he is a rental. Where, like, you look at the Soto, well, you hope that he won't be, but you can't control that. Like, let's say you're using the Jays as the example. It doesn't sound like he wants to be in the East. Like it sounds like he wants to be on the West Coast. That could change, and obviously once you get him in-house, you're doing everything you can to convince him to stay. But as of now, this is like when Soto went to the Padres, they had him for 3 years. Like that was not a rental. They had him under control. They still have him for another year and a half. Like, and that haul was insane. Like that haul was crazy what the Nationals got for him, as it should have been, considering where he was at and what the Padres thought they were going to achieve. Falling flat in their face this year. But, like Ohtani, I don't know. I'm curious what the talks of – because obviously if you're the Angels, you're demanding everything, as you should. It should get you the biggest haul for a rental in baseball history. But if you're the other teams, it's a rental. You're getting him for like 60 games in the playoffs. So, like, you can't pay him as if you got him under control for 3 or 4 years. So how do you handle that?
And I've used this analogy, like if you're thinking about watching a wildlife video and it's the hunt on the Serengeti and you've got a pride of lions on land that have a gazelle in knee-high water that is being stared down by a hippo on the other end. It's like, well, where's the gazelle going to go? You can't retreat to water because that hippo's waiting. You can't retreat to the land because the pride of lions is waiting. So it's almost like the groups of teams that could be interested can just ultimately wait it out. And if you're not willing to take the packages we're willing to offer, then we are ultimately going to force you into a spot where you have just sold Ohtani to the free agent market and your return is exactly zero.
Right. Exactly. And it always is a game of chicken, right? You get to that last day, that last hour, it's like, hey, this is what you got, man. Hey, you figure it out.
Yeah,
what are you thinking?
And it's almost like the value. Yeah, and it's almost like the value of Ohtani is what drives that is what can help drive that side of the market and say, look, realistically, we all know how tough it's going to be to negotiate this contract. We have no idea what this contract even looks like. So understanding that, you have to know why we're not willing to part ways with X, Y, and Z amount of prospects or top prospects. So if everybody, which I don't know, in the past, it's kind of showed that this can happen. If everybody kind of gets on the same page and is like, this is the cap on what we're willing to offer across the board, and the Angels just don't get what they're looking for, well, then they're going to be forced to sit on Ohtani or take the best possible offer. But either way, this story ends with no Ohtani and no postseason.
With Dallas Braden, one team that most people would have expected to be in on a hypothetical Ohtani conversation would be the Yankees, but they just lost a series in Colorado coming out of the break. There's still 6 games over 500. They're a couple of games out of the wild card. It's New York, so they're not going to sell. They're not going to. They're not going to concede. But if you put this roster in a smaller market, and they lost 6 of their next 8 or so leading up to the deadline, how far off would it be from them saying we should punt on this season? Like, how far off are the Yankees from realizing they're not that good and they don't feel like a World Series contending team?
Yeah, I don't know that that's ever going to be a realization that has come to in the Big Apple, right?
No,
and
no.
I know that there's a lot of fans that are clamoring for movement in the front office, and I would say that, to your point about them being in any other division or a different division or a different market, then yeah, there's probably more attention paid to the churn. Is it time to move the turnstiles and get some new faces in here, restock the coffers? Is that an approach that we are willing to entertain? But I think the simple fact that the market and the history of the franchise won't ever allow that to be a public statement that is made or a public direction that is taken. And I think anytime you are a franchise that has a captain of sorts, you're telling the rest of the league, you're telling the rest of the world that you fancy yourselves a competitor year in and year out. Like, we have a captain of our roster. And so that's just something that I don't think will ever happen, is that public stance taken in a teardown or a rebuild or a retool, however you'd like to lightly powder it. But yeah, I think right now the Yankees, as they sit, they're tied for last place in that division with the Red Sox, who I believe have the tiebreaker. Not great.
No.
Not great right now.
No, not great. Thank you, Dallas. Always appreciate it.
No problem, boys. Have a good one.
Dallas Braden, former MLB pitcher, Baseball is Dead podcast host, joining us here on the Maple Toyota Hotline. Build your next dream Toyota at Maple Toyota and check out Maple Toyota's pre-owned inventory. Arriving daily, it's time to Toyota. Visit mapletoyota.com. Yeah, the Ohtani hypotheticals. Are you buying a rental? Or are you buying are you also acquiring a guy who you get the first opportunity to really try to sell on keeping? Is your owner even willing to do it? That's another thing, right? Like, we've seen these deals in baseball where guys go to small markets and it's understood they're just not signing there long term because the owner won't pay it.
Well, so to your point, let's say you are the Jays and you get word that Ohtani is like, he'll come, he has to come, but he's not going to commit to anything. Right. And the Angels say, we need Manoah in the deal. And I think Manoah has like 4 more years after this.
Got a lot of control.
Is that a deal breaker for you, or is that like, all right, well, I guess we got to do it?
No, it wouldn't be a deal breaker for me. Now, again, you need to know what else they'd be asking for.
Okay, well, let's put this package together. What else?
Here's another element to it, is who else can be coming with Ohtani, right? Like, that's another thing. We talk about that Soto deal. There were multiple guys that went the other way with him, right? We mentioned that Scherzer deal from Washington to L.A. Trey Turner went with him.
Yeah.
Right? So who else is on the Angels that you feel like you can bring in that can also round out your roster? Is there a bullpen arm or two that can come with them, where it's like, if you guys are out and you want us to pay this massive price, you got to throw in a couple more people. That happens a lot.
Yeah.
So that's another thing you got to consider, is it may not just be Ohtani. It could be Ohtani plus a piece or two that also can bolster your roster. Listen, it's an incredibly nerve-wracking play. Incredibly nerve-wracking play. But if you feel like you can win a World Series, I think you're open to almost anything. You know, like you're not sending Bichette the other way.
No, those guys.
You're not sending Vladdy the other way. But listen, Manoah is not. This year's been a pretty wild year. Like, it's been a pretty wild year, and if he returns to form and he's a stud for the next 10 years in LA, and that's a
Right?
huge haul. It's a big haul. But I think if you're the Jays, you'd be selling if you were willing to do that. And I don't know if they would be, but you'd be selling that. You're selling the guy who was third for Cy Young last year, and basically it's like we're not giving much more than that because look at what you're getting. Forget this guy who was just in the Florida Complex League 3 weeks ago. You're getting the guy who was third in the Cy Young. It's all a chess game, right? And as Dallas pointed out, at some point there's a deadline. And if the Angels are committed and they're like, we got to flip them, whatever your best deal, that's the best deal. You're not getting more than whatever's on the table. So, I don't know. I hope it happens.
I have one
Regardless
more
of where he goes, I just hope it happens.
We'll save this for later, but I got another question to ask you on this.
Yeah, another one for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Big one.
Big one coming up. Curtis Strange will join us, two-time U.S. Open champ, ESPN golf analyst. Get his take on McIlroy yesterday, what he expects out of the Open Championship this week. Steve Phillips in just over 40 minutes. Chad Kelly, quarterback for the Argos, 4-0 Argos. He's coming up in about an hour. OverDrive continues. TSN 1050 and on the TSN app.
Now, back to OverDrive with Hayes, Noodles, and the O-Dog.
I told you long ago on the road, I got what they waiting for. Run from nothing, dog. Get your soul. Just tell them ain't
Strange will join us here in a moment. Jonas, you got one big thing you want to ask me.
Okay. So this is a baseball question before we get to golf. So we're talking all about Ohtani, right? And the Angels, whether they should trade him or not, and obviously they should. If you're going to trade Ohtani, don't you now start to have to kind of look around? Like, if I was in charge, I'd be like, should we trade Trout
Yes.
too?
Absolutely. The answer is unequivocally yes.
Right?
Yes.
So he has,
Now-
I think he has 7 years left on his contract, no trade. But
Yikes.
don't you just go to him and say, listen, dude, like, we're not close. We're trading Ohtani. Do you want to go somewhere else? And it's probably too hard to do now in season, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's not going to happen now because of the injury and
That too, right.
the logistics of the magnitude of the contract. And you're dealing with a guy who's 31 and he's got massive money and massive term left. But as you said, he's got 10 and 5 rights. He'd control the whole thing. But yes, I think so. I would think it should be Trout who meets them halfway anyways. Goes, get me out of here. Like, you got to go, man. The Angels, it feels like it's never going to happen. It's never going to work.
No.
You know, ever since he's been there, they've just constantly been disappointing. Like, it starts the same thing this year. They got out of the gate strong. Started well in the hunt. And slowly but surely, they fade and fade and fade and fade.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at Trout, like his first, 10 full seasons. Second in MVP, Rookie of the Year. Second in MVP. Then he won the MVP. Second in MVP. Then he won it. Fourth, second, first, fifth.
It's like as good as it gets, basically.
That's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
Like, legitimately, when he was rocking, we're talking 2014, 2015, 2016. There were baseball historians saying this is as good as it gets. Like, this is better than Ruth, better than Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron. Throw it all together. Barry Bonds. Like, this guy could go down as the greatest ever. 3 playoff games. And now he's hurt. It's wild. Big weekend this weekend over in Scotland. Oh, Robert McIntyre almost had it, Jonas. I know you're rooting for Bob McIntyre. You're a big McIntyre guy. I know that's your
Big
guy.
fan.
And McIlroy went out, birdie coming home, hit a 2-iron stinger that is a shot that everyone's going to be buzzing about for a long time. And to chat about that, among other things, including the Open Championship this week, we're joined now by 2-time U.S. Open champ, ESPN golf analyst. Here is Curtis Strange. How you doing, Curtis?
Good, man. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well. I don't know how many people have asked you about 2-iron stingers, over the last 10 to 15 years, but What a shot by McIlroy on 18 yesterday. And, you're an old-school golf guy. You love those kind of low irons and playing through the wind. We don't see that too often anymore.
Well, it's because we had not many options.
True.
The ball didn't go as far. We had different clubs, and the ball. Well, when you didn't hit it so far, it didn't go as far because you hit it and flighted it down. That way, we played the way we played, more under control, more trajectory oriented, where you could control it once it hits the ground and in the air. So it's a different game, trust me. But I loved watching it last week. McIntyre hitting the stingers, the low shots. Mm-hmm. Anything to control the ball, and that's what I love about it when the elements or, when I watch a guy miss a tee shot in the woods, that's where the talent comes in. Can he maneuver the ball out, low, up, low, left or right, hard, high, hook? Can he do that like a Seve Ballesteros or Phil Mickelson? That's where the real talent shows. But last week, you better have some talent. Hit it in the middle of close. I used to play Scottish.
Well, I was watching something over the weekend. It was about, I think, Nicklaus and Watson going back and forth. And Nicklaus was talking about how he loved the Open because it was so different. Links courses, the wind, the different styles. And he always used to say, and he said in this clip, he'd roll his eyes when guys would say, wow, this course or this style of golf doesn't fit my game. And he's like, that's the point. Like the court, you got to fit your game to the course, right? Like why would the course fit to you?
Yeah, and talent, you can't hide talent. And if you have it, you can play anywhere. Mm-hmm. If you can only play a certain way on certain courses in certain conditions in a region in the U.S., then you're not going to love playing at the Open Championship. You're not going to love playing at Pebble Beach or where the weather gets, crazy sometimes. So, or even in a U.S. Open where par is a good score. So I get Jack. I get it. I wasn't a huge fan of it initially, and I learned to enjoy it and learned, I think my game, I learned more about how to hit the shots because we're not demanding, we weren't demanded to hit those shots, but very few times playing the U.S. Tour.
With Curtis Strange, Open Championship this week. You can watch it up here on TSN. Rory McIlroy winning the Scottish Open. Does that change how you feel about his chances of winning this week?
Absolutely, without a doubt. And it's not his play in general. It's been his play on Sunday. Now, we're splitting hairs, the three of us, if we question anything Rory McIlroy does because he has more talent in his little finger than the three of us have in our whole body put together, okay? But we expect a lot out of him. And he's the reason because he won 4 majors so quickly in his career. It's been 9 years since he's won a major. So hang on a second. So, I think more than anything else, it helps his own confidence that he can finish on Sunday in tough conditions. I saw the weather wasn't going to be great this week, but he's still up there, but he just hasn't done it. And that along with Rahm and Scheffler and maybe Cam Smith are certainly the top 4 right now.
Well, Curtis, if we go back to 2014 and I had told you Rory wouldn't win another major for 9 years, what would your reaction have been? Would you have been surprised? Would you have been like, yeah, sometimes that's the way it goes?
Well, it would have been much like my response would have been much like if you'd said Tiger would have been stuck on 15 for the rest of his life. We did a couple, for ESPN, we did a couple of his championships over there, and it was he made it look easy. His length, Rory's not a big guy at all. Rory's 5'11", 165 or 70 pounds, and he always hit it a long way. So gets a lot of the body, a lot of speed, a lot of hand-eye coordination. That's what it comes down to, basically. So, but stuck at 9 years without a major, I would have bet the ranch on that. But here we are, and can he do it again? Absolutely, he can do it again because he continues to play well. He just hasn't done it one of the 4 weeks that we at so closely.
Right, and he's got a ton of top fives right over those 9 years. It's not like he misses the cut all the time. The guy's always in contention. This time last year at St. Andrews, he's got the lead through 54 holes and is feeling good coming around the turn until Cam Smith decided I'm just going to take off. And we were talking about this, Curtis, in the tennis world, where this young kid Carlos Alcaraz. Now everyone's like, well, because Djokovic did it and Federer and Nadal, you got to go and win 20 plus. And it feels like that's kind of what happened with Rory. As you said, he won 4 so quick. But because we were still kind of living in Tiger's world, it was like, all right, well, you got to be chasing 14, 15. And that's just so unfair, like to expect that of anybody.
Yeah, it is unfair. Yeah, it's unfair that we project on these young kids so quickly. Let them mature. Let them play, let them enjoy life, and let's see what happens 15 years down the road. It's this kid that won Wimbledon yesterday. We're already saying he's going to have to win 20 to be any good, basically.
Right.
Well, that's so unfair and it just puts so much weight on his shoulders. And when somebody does that, it puts pressure on you because you read it, you hear about it, you're asked about it. And so you have to have a strong mind to just disregard all of that white noise in the background and just go play your game. And then if you don't continue to do that, then what's wrong? Well, there's nothing wrong. There's a lot of great players I'm playing against in Rory's case and Alcatraz's case. So, just do the best you can be every day. Work hard, and where the chips fall is where they should fall.
Where do you see the future of Tiger Woods going here? What is your projection, Curtis, in terms of what Tiger, what his career looks like in the next 3 to 5 years?
Wow. Well, if he plays at all, he's not going to play much.
Right.
He's now, after the leg and now the ankle, and the doctors I talked to, I don't know how much he's going to be able to move the ankle. So therefore, can he push off of it? Fusing the ankle will limit even the way he can even walk, which he couldn't walk very well to start with before the ankle surgery. So that's really up in the air, and we're speculating on any of that. But you know what? He was trying to play, God bless him, and, we loved him trying to play the last 2 years. But, he just can't play very well because he's a battered – physically he's a battered man. And there's just, there's a lot of moving parts in this game. And, I didn't play well if I had a little headache or a fingernail that hurt, much less a body. So I felt like everything had to be just perfect to get this ball going where I was looking. And in Tiger's case, it's far from that. So, you know what? In the big picture, he still has so much to offer this game through his foundation, through who he is, much like a Michael Jordan in his sport. He could just be a big part of the game. I don't know. I think the sky is limit. He could do anything he wants to do, but he could really help junior kids. He could help people in general. And if he wants to, we'll have to wait and see where that takes him to.
Right. With Curtis Strange, we'll get you out of here on a prediction this week at Royal Liverpool. You mentioned, obviously you love what Rory's been doing, but is there anyone else you got your eye on this week that you think could be someone that could do some damage?
Yeah, there's 10 or 12 guys that that could do well here. But I think we talk about the top 3, 4, or 5, and Cam Smith is not playing a lot of golf and I don't know really exactly how he's playing because he's over there on that Live Tour, and I don't watch that. So, John Rahm and Scotty Scheffler are having tremendous years. Scotty Scheffler especially, and seems to play well every day he goes out.
Isn't that amazing, Curtis? He is top 5 all the time. All the time.
All the time. And statistically, when we did the PGA here 6 weeks ago, he's in the top 1 or 2 in every category there is. And the other guy is John Rahm just about. So he's not only on top of the money list and winning some tournaments, he's statistically ball striking better than anybody else. Chipping and putting, he's not the top 1 or 2, I don't think, but he's certainly in the top 10. And that's a pretty good combination when you're a good ball striker and you can also chip and putt it. And as a result, he's playing well. So can he that when you go to the Open Championship, a lot of it's just the luck of the draw on when the weather rolls in and what your tee time is. But can you accept the bounces? Do you embrace some of that type of golf? And I'm sure he does, but it certainly weighs on your patience. So it's hard to go past the first 4 or 5 guys, because they're so good and so talented.
He is two-time U.S. Open champ, ESPN golf analyst Curtis Strange. Really appreciate the insight and the time. Thank you for doing this, Curtis.
Hey, thanks for having me, and everybody enjoy next week. It's going to be another terrific Open championship.
You got it. You too. We will. There he is, Curtis Strange. Some Open picks later in the week. I said Alcaraz 15 times, and then I say Alcatraz once, and people are going nuts.
You're close.
I'm getting people tweeting in saying, dude, it's not a prison that just won the Wimbledon yesterday. Alcaraz. Carlos Alcaraz. Alcatraz. You mess up one time, Jonas. People are ruthless.
It happens.
Alcatraz is a cooler name, though, right?
Maybe his nickname should be Alcatraz Alcaraz.
It absolutely should be. In the tennis world, where this young kid, Carlos Alcatraz, that was really actually sharp. Not even like I tried to muffle it, like I didn't really know. That was just a blatant slip. Alcatraz. Anyway, that kid's good. You know I'm not the only one that's going to do that, right, Jonas? Hey, you see that Alcatraz kid? Man, he's good. He is a stud.
You know what he had, though, that was impressive? He was poised. Like, he didn't seem phased by it. And he had played Djokovic at the final a few months back. Was it the Aussie Open he played him, I think?
Yep.
And you just, like, there's certain guys, I guess when you're that age and you're that good, maybe you just don't get rattled. I don't know.
Listen, he's been on the scene now for a couple of years, and everyone's waiting. Who's the next kid that's going to show up? Like, we've been so spoiled for the better part of 15 years with a 3-pack, right? Like, Andy Murray shows up at any other time. Like, there was a time in between, like, Sampras.
I remember Andy Roddick was, like, the best player in the world.
Right. Like, if Murray was around in, like, the early 2000s, guy could have cleaned up. But he wasn't. Happened to play when Federer was going, and Nadal and Djokovic, and now Alcatraz is here, and we'll see what he can bring. All right, Steve Phillips in about 20 minutes. Chad Kelly in about 45. OverDrive continues, TSN 1050.
Back to OverDrive with Hayes, Noodles, and the O-Dog.
All right, Steve Phillips in about 15 minutes. We'll get to Something to Chew On, brought to you by Boston Pizza, 6 p.m. as well. Saw Masai Ujiri trending online, Jonas, because, we're in an interesting time in the NBA where there's not a lot going on. We're still waiting for the Damian Lillard situation to play out. You got Joel Embiid saying all he wants to do is win, whether it's in Philly or elsewhere, right? People are wondering what's going to happen there. Is Embiid going to flip? Harden wants out. Like, I wonder what Nick Nurse is thinking right now. Goes to Philly, gets paid a fortune, right? But Harden wants out. Embiid possibly is going to want out if this crumbles. Then what? They're going to be in a rebuild all of a sudden, and Nick Nurse goes from one spot that wasn't great to the next spot that won't be great in terms of actually winning? It's possible.
Why was Masai trending?
Well, let me play a clip here, all right? David Thorpe, who is he's a writer. He's big in NBA circles. He's been covering the NBA for a long time. He was on, I believe, the True Hoop podcast, and there's this one clip that is starting to go viral. You want to hear what David had to say?
Absolutely.
I've been told that Masai's job isn't as secure as it once was, and he recognizes that.
Masai's job not as secure as it once was, and he recognizes that. What do you make of that, Jonas?
So, on the one hand, I think that would inevitably be true just because they haven't had as much success the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
As we get further and further from 2019, we get further and further from 2019.
Yep.
And I think they're at a point right now where it doesn't feel like there's a clear direction for where they're going. They feel a little rudderless.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if Masai left, he would get a job somewhere else.
Oh, I don't
tomorrow.
think he'd be worried about that.
So I don't know. I don't know what to make of that because he's obviously one of the better executives in the NBA. Look at his track record here. Look at it in Denver. I don't know. Like, I don't know.
Well,
I don't
I
know.
think there's a couple different ways to look at this. One, clearly it is true because it's not 2019 anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like there was a time where he was immortal, where Masai was a god. He is still a brand unto of himself, but he was bigger than the team in a way. Like Masai was separate because of what he represented and what he did and pulling off the Kawhi trade and winning a championship for a team that for a long, long time that felt like an impossibility. So clearly he's not still in that spot. I think ownership factors in here too. Larry Tannenbaum looks like he's kind of getting out or is moving in a direction where he's getting out. And by all accounts, Larry and Masai very close. We know of the reports. Rodgers not so high on Masai, right? During the negotiations, it sounded as if the Rodgers side of things were kind of pushing back on the idea that you just got to give everything to Masai.
Not so high on paying everything for Masai.
Not so high on paying Masai and making him the highest paid executive, and maybe thinking like, okay, is he possibly a little bit, is his reputation blown out of proportion? Those were the reports. The accuracy of it all, I don't know. But if you have Tannenbaum possibly moving out or shifting in a way, one of the two major owners not ecstatic with the contract to begin with, and now a team that hasn't been that great and just saw Fred walk for nothing. Listen, Nick Nurse was on that championship team too. He's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Like his day came and went. I'm not saying it is today from a side, nor should it be. But it is not 2019 anymore. And I think if Masai's a self-aware guy, like he'd be silly not to understand the wind is changing a little bit in Toronto. So, as much like this is a pretty significant comment because of who it's coming from. But when you take a step back, I think it's understandable that Masai probably should feel a little bit less secure. Now, that doesn't mean he's feeling only 10% of security. It's still probably 90%. But there was a time 2 or 3 years ago where it was 100%. Like it was written in stone. And it's no longer the case. Final hour coming up. OverDrive continues. TSN 1050 and on the TSN app.